ICU.
Welcome to ICU. I'm Melanie Price, guest hosting for Eddie Robinson. The Marching Storm, the Ocean of Soul, the Human Jukebox, the Sonic Boom of the South. Even if you are unfamiliar with these names, you might be familiar with the movie Drumline or Beyoncé's 2018 Coachella performance. At HBCUs, or historically black colleges, homecoming is upon us. These festivities are accompanied by a wall of sound, marching bands that mix traditional fanfare, R&B, dance routines, and songs you just heard on the radio. You can lose an entire football game, but hold your head high because your band won the fifth quarter. On this episode, we'll talk to band directors at Texas Southern and Prairie View A&M universities about HBCU bands. The sound and fury of black college marching bands on this episode of ICU. This is Melanie Price on ICU. My guests today are responsible for two of the most dynamic HBCU, or historically black college marching bands in America. Brian Simmons is the director of the Ocean of Soul marching band at Texas Southern University, making him the youngest band director in the Southwest Athletic Conference, the premier HBCU football league. I'm also joined by Dr. Timmy Zachary, who is a professor of music and director of the Marching Storm Band at Prairie View A&M University. Interestingly, they are both alums of the Southern University Marching Band, which is also a very famous marching band. And full disclosure before we begin the show, my mom marched for a year with the Ocean of Soul when she was a freshman in college. And I've had two relatives in the Marching Storm, so my family has a very long history with both of these bands. I want to be clear that I have no allegiances necessarily to either of these bands, even though one is my alma mater. But I'll let you as the audience decide by the end of the show whether or not I've shown any favoritism towards either one. So welcome, Mr. Simmons, and welcome, Dr. Zachary.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So before we get to the actual performance, I want to talk a little bit about Black college band history, if you don't mind. And I was looking up sources about this, and one of the things that I don't know that I totally realized is that Black college bands come out of a long history of Black participation in military marching bands, right? And so one of the sources suggested that Blacks who were interested in military service prior to the Civil War were often wanting to serve in places where Black men were forbidden from bearing arms. And so they ended up being in the bands a lot. And they also talked about World War II and the brass bands that were used there and the ways in which Black veterans came home after the war to return to these Black colleges to be a part of the band. And I wanted to start with you, Dr. Zachary, because then I saw that you were in the naval band. Mm-hmm. And so that leads me to wonder how much of this sort of military influence works in how the bands are organized and how they are trained. So do you still see remnants of that history?
I do. I think that all HBCU bands have a paramilitary background. And from a historical perspective, all bands in this country were based and rooted in the military style up until 1952. And that's with the advent of Florida A&M putting on the first quote-unquote dance routine with the Alexander Ragtime Band. So historically speaking, we were all rooted in that. And Prairie View's bands in the 1920s and 30s was a military band, all the way until we got into the 1940s and they came up with the co-ed ensemble, which was the all-female band here because of World War II. So our histories are rooted in that particular thing. And there's another perspective that doesn't get any traction, and that's the fact that a lot of the directors at that time, including Dr. Foster and others, were educated at University of Michigan in schools in the Big Ten.
Michigan Marching Band.
So they brought those traditions back to the HBCUs, and a lot of the traditions that we have mirror those traditions.
I didn't know that. did my graduate work at a Big Ten called The Ohio State University, who, when I got there, as you both know, call themselves the best damn band in the land. And when I saw that, I thought, how is that possible? Because I just left a university that might argue against that. So, Mr. Simmons, how much of the history of Black college bands in general do you guys focus on? Do both of you do a lot of sort of teaching of history as a part of orienting the students into the band? Do you do that? And how important is that for what you get out of the students in their performances?
Well, I think we always talk about history, and they say if you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. If you think about the culture that we live in today, these kids, I say kids all the time, but they're students, they're young adults.
Me too. Young adults, but I call them kids as well.
These young adults, they're in a fast, almost microwave society. Nothing lasts too long. They're on to the next. They don't stay on anything. So with that being said, they're not really familiar with our history and what we do. And when you don't understand the history and what we do, you forget your actual purpose of actually being there and what you serve. And so when it comes to marching band, but especially when you start talking about historically Black colleges and universities, our first job is to, one, educate, and two, to entertain. And so a lot of times we want to focus on the latter. And that's not what it's really about. It's still music education. So we have to always go back to the history and our forefathers and everybody who bought and created this culture for us so we can understand what we're doing, we can stay on task. So we do it all of the time, whether it's film study, whether it's score study, whether it's playing selections from another genre, whether we have to look at a different band logo or a different uniform. Even people don't even think about that. When we design uniforms as band directors, we are looking to the future. We're looking to refresh, but we still have to think about where we've been. We still have to try to incorporate little small things that made the program what it is, so that it's at least recognizable and identifiable to those who were serving previously. So we do it on a daily basis.
So that's interesting that you are also, like the football team, watching film. I don't know why I never conceptualized that. Are you looking at the team, the school that you're playing against that week? Are you looking at your past footage? What kinds of things are you looking at, Dr. Zachary?
Both.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go to a performance and represent yourself well without respecting the people that you're going to perform against. That's Sun Tzu. Know your enemy and respect your enemy. That's the only way you can defeat him. Dismissing him, bad idea. So we do our research, and we also think about what works and what doesn't work. And it's not just in this genre. We look around, we look on YouTube and see how many hits a tune has before we play it. So if it has 2 million hits, we're pretty certain that somebody understands. Quite a few people will understand what it is, especially if it's something, as Mr. Simmons was saying, about the nature of where we are now as far as time and the relevance of how long things last. TikTok. There are so many things on TikTok today, but you can do a TikTok dance routine if you pick the right things. And in order to do that, you must do your research. And to allude to your earlier question, you cannot be in the marching storm without taking a history exam that you have to pass with 100%. Otherwise, you can't even be in the band.
Wow. I don't even know what to say to that.
And
for some reason, I'm very afraid about that right now.
Oh, there's 75 questions on that exam. And
here's the thing that's interesting in the way both of you talk about this, though. You talk about this in terms of the other band being your competitor, right? This is not, I am going as an appendage to my football team. I am going with my own competitor in mind. Is that the mindset that you use as you prepare for the next week's game?
Yes, in the context, but no. Yes, we look at it as competition because we have a job to do. We're not just auxiliary. We are just as responsible for recruitment as everybody else and on the university campus. It's everybody's responsibility. So when Texas Southern University plays a Prairie View A&M University, there are high school students there that, guess what, on this day is going to help them make their decision. And we have to be able to put out not only a performance better than Prairie View A&M, but the best in the standard of Texas Southern University, so that we can show these, future leaders and future musicians what we have to offer. So we compete, but we're our own competition. And I'm pretty sure Dr. Zachary can say the same thing. Band, I used to tell my students at Southern all the time, band is the game of what have you done for me lately, okay? What you did last week, nobody worried about that. So every year, every performance, you have to go hard. Every performance is somebody's first time seeing you. So with that being the case, You can't go in there half stepping because we're competing for too many things. We're not just competing of who have the best halftime show. We're not just competing for who played the loudest rap song. We're competing for a whole bunch of things. We're competing for cultural relevance. You know, a student is going to look at what Prairie View side of the football stadium is doing versus what the Texas Southern University side of the football stadium. They're going to look at what role the band plays in that. They're going to look for all of these things. Students nowadays, I hate to say it this way, but much less of a music education. They're looking for more of a music college experience. And so we have to come in there locked and loaded to provide these things. And to Dr. Zachary's point earlier, when it comes to watching film and studying these things, it's also for historical context. You don't know what you don't know. So there's a lot of times we think that we've done something. Oh, we're going to do this. Oh, this is crazy. This would be nice. But until you go back and look at it in 1982, somebody did that. And then they may have done it better. They may have done it worse. But all history, it plays a part in what we do today. So I think this conversation is important because it shows people that band and ensemble and chamber music, all of these things in ensembles is very important. And it's bigger than a football game.
So when I go to see each of your bands, what are some of the hallmarks of the Marching Storm? How do I know that I've been to a Marching Storm performance? And I'm going to ask you the same too, Simmons, so you get ready.
Well, from our perspective, one of the things that I have instituted and something that I've been taught for generations of band directors, my high school band director went to Southern. So for years, I've been taught if you can't tell whose band it is from around the corner, the band director's not doing a good job. So if I don't have a uniqueness, something about us that says we're different from everyone else, I'm not doing my job. I don't want to be a carbon copy of anybody. So that's what our focus is here. We're going to be unique. We're going to have a great sound. We're going to have balance. We're going to have blend. And we're going to entertain. So we're going to try to put all of the factors on the table that you learned in the music history book, in the music theory book, as well as what you learned by watching the James Brown show. We have to put it all together because our students have to go on to other places. And there are very few jobs that you can get doing what we do. It's like 0 to none. So they have to be prepared in order to take those jobs in civic symphonies and hometown concert bands, even though they may be a lawyer or a doctor. But we have to prepare them to go to the next level. And that's what we do here.
So one of the things I know is when you hear our audiences might be familiar with the theme song to Entertainment Tonight. And when you hear that in Prairie View, that means the band is really getting ready to do something.
Every
right?
HBCU band has its own signature.
Right.
And when I got to Prairie View 10 years ago, I had enough experience at Norfolk State and working there for 14 years to understand how to respect. There has to be enough so that people can gravitate to say, I went to that school and I remember that band without having so much change that they're like, that's a new band. I don't know that band. And you have to balance that with the people here who are here now to say, hey, we brought this to the table as well. So it's a really strange scale. And, that Entertainment Tonight, when I first got here, I was like, I don't know about this. And after a while, I realized if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be here.
I'm pretty sure that the one time that happened, everybody would be calling the president like, I'm sorry, this man does not understand.
I put it in a different part of the show at, I think it was a Labor Day Classic a few years ago. I put it in the middle of the show. Mm-hmm. Boy, you should have heard the boos at the beginning of the show. Just switching it around caused a almost catastrophic event. So,
Professor Simmons, when I hear the TSU Ocean of Soul Band, what is it? What's the hallmark? What are the things that mark it as the Ocean of Soul Band?
Well, this is a very interesting question, and I'm glad that I'm coming after Dr. Zachary. He's talking in a retrospect and experience standpoint, but he's talking about what I'm dealing with currently. So,
right.
For me,
this is your first year as band director.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So after I was a student at Southern University for 4 years, I worked at Southern University for 7.5 years. And so now I'm here at Texas Southern University. I've been here since July. And I will say this. I understand exactly what he's saying. I understand exactly what you're asking. It's one of those things to whereas I learned in a leadership class when I was getting my master's degree. They said, when you come into a program or organization and you're taking over for a minute, you have to just sit back and experience. You have to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And so there's a lot of things that I think that work. There's a lot of things that I think that doesn't work, but I'm still in the process of accepting and just even revitalizing a few things. To me, the name Ocean of Soul, like we hear it all the time. We just say it. What does that mean to somebody? I'm focused on soulful arrangement, soulful execution. I want people to feel a kind of way. I want you, when you hear the band, either you're going to love it or you're going to hate it, but you're going to feel something. I don't want to be the band and we play something and they be like, okay, no. So I'm working on that. I'm working on making the drills and just the execution of the things we do. I want it to be more exciting on the entertainment side. But Texas Southern University has a rich history. So when you listening to the game, just like Dr. Zachary said, Entertainment Tonight, and I'm pretty sure Swamp, all those things, that's what people want. And at some levels, we're like, okay, let's try some other stuff. But no. So when you show up on 3100 Cleveland Street, you're going to get Screw. They call it June 27th. That. It's another, so Torture by the Jacksons.
Ring My Bell.
Yeah, all of that. That's what they want. And so those are some of the staples of the band.
Let's take it to a different direction because both of you are alum of Southern University's band. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting because I also, I was born in the 1970s and my mom would tell stories of the antics of bands, right? And she tells the story about how when she was young, Grambling would pull a whole baby grand piano onto the football field.
And everybody in white tuxedos.
Right, and all these things that people would do. And I'm interested in what drew you to these bands. Is it something you grew up knowing about and you said, I want to do this? Is it something you were introduced to? Like, how do you come to be a part of a Black college band?
For me, it was a very awkward and roundabout experience. I never intended to be a band director. That was never a thought in college. I went to Southern University to study with Alvin Batiste, who was a world-renowned jazz clarinetist and jazz educator, and phenomenal. And I studied classical trumpet at LSU with Dr. James West. My first set of lessons were with Dr. Walter Craig. So at all of these experiences, I was a performer. And when I left Southern, I performed with the Virginia Symphony for 10 years. And so that was never on my mind, but as a trumpet player, and someone that was introduced to the experience by my high school band director and my middle school band director who went to Mississippi Valley. My first boss was actually his teacher. That was his first teaching job at Mississippi Valley, teaching my teacher. So all of these things were like a gravitational pull for me to do this. It wasn't a directional thing for me. And all of a sudden, I ended up at Norfolk State with two of the biggest men in the industry, Dr. O'Neill Sanford and Professor Paul Adams. And I worked with them for 14 years, and also Ms. Stephanie Sanders, who's phenomenal, and Mr. Bethea. And we did all this stuff for years, and the gravitational pull became greater and greater. And I was on the road less and less and less, playing with the Temptations, playing with Natalie Cole. And then all of a sudden, you're the head band director of PV. So it's like, wow, you wake up, you're like, how did I get here? It's a great place to be. I still don't consider this work. This is still too much fun. And there's too much power for change and good for me to consider this work.
How did you become a part of a band, Professor Simmons?
Well, similar to Dr. Zachary, I didn't want to be a band director either. And I'm not going to say I didn't want to be, but it wasn't a plan. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, where band is very competitive and prominent. But it's in a way that it saves so many lives for students. If you have a choice, to be outside on the streets after school or go to band practice. And so that's something that I picked up on. I always had a connection with music. And I'm not even just talking about marching band music. I'm talking about listening to music, studying music. It just made me feel a certain kind of way. So maybe about when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I started working on, I always wanted to write my own songs. I always wanted to compose, things of that nature. I remember being in band practice. We played a song. This was my first year in band. We got to sheet music and it said Hearts to Heart. And it said Lawrence Jackson on it. And so there was no artist on the music. It was just Hearts to Heart. Then it had arranged by Lawrence Jackson. So we started playing it. And so once we started playing it and get through the song, I'm like, I don't know who Lawrence Jackson is, but he's awesome. He made this song up. This is amazing. I've never heard this in my life. So I was excited. That gave me the thrill to get into arranging, get into music composition. So the more I started to study, I found this little object in a drawer at home. It looked like a little bell. It was big and it looked like a bell. So I'm like, what is this? So I just took it out for one day. And so one day my dad came home. He's like, where you found that? I said, it was in the drawer. What is this? He said, it's a mouthpiece. I said, for what? He said, a baritone. I was like, what are you talking about? My dad played a Southern band, never told me. He played a Southern band in 1987, never told me. So once he told me about Southern University, I started doing my research. I'm like, okay, these guys this is it right here. I've never seen band to that level. So once I set my mind on it, I had to decide. And when you young in high school and you look at a Southern University, you have to ask yourself, either you're going to be with them or against them. And I chose to be with them. So it was a no-brainer. So once I got to Southern University, I just majored in music because that's just what I knew. I didn't know what I was going to do with it afterwards. But maybe by my sophomore year, Mr. Hamer and Mr. Jackson pulled me in and they were like, we want you to do some work for the band. I was like, okay, cool. They were like, we want you to write some selections. I was like, okay, that ain't nothing. So I started doing it. So then I become a senior. So now I find myself 22 years old, assistant director of band, Southern University, chief arranger for the band. And I learned to be a band director every day just by what I was doing. And here we are 7.5 years later, I'm the band director at TSU. So, hey, Dr. Zachary.
If you're just joining us, this is ICU. I'm Melanie Price talking to Timmy Zachary and Brian Simmons. They're both directors of HBCU bands in the Houston area. When we return, we'll talk more about performance and what happens when the band reaches the field on ICU. This is Melanie Price. Welcome back to ICU. I'm Melanie Price. We're talking about homecoming, and one of the most important ingredients at a HBCU homecoming is the band. So to get a little more information on how these bands become the stars that they are, we're talking to the directors of the Prairie View A&M University and Texas Southern University Band. Dr. Timmy Zachary is the director of Prairie View A&M's Marching Storm, and Professor Brian Simmons is the director of Texas Southern University's Ocean of Soul. So let's talk performance. Here's the thing that I think is really interesting. You guys do a lot of stuff. You do traditional band fanfare and classical composition. Mm-hmm. You do classic R&B, soul, and blues. Mm-hmm. And then you do songs we just heard on the radio last week. Give us a sense of what your preparation for a game looks like. How do you decide what you're going to play? How often do you change the routine throughout the season? And what are some things that just go in no matter what?
Dr. Zachary, you got it, senior.
All right there, junior. For us, the process is very organic. It depends on the year. And of course, being in COVID is something we have not talked about. This has brought out a new sense of purpose and a new direction that we have to take as far as education. The great thing is that if you are patient enough and you are receptive enough, you can accept change. And I think that as a staff, we've done that. We've allowed the world to go absolutely bananas based on where we are. But we've taken this opportunity to retool and make sure that we come out better than we were before. So we're not changing shows every show like we used to. And that has actually helped the band to be better because they can actually perfect something, which is something that has gotten lost in HBCU bands. When I had the opportunity to march at Southern, and I was there from 88 to 92, we would do maybe 3 shows a year. And Dr. Greggs had about 11 shows on his clipboard, and he would remanufacture them in all kinds of ways. But it allowed a certain modicum of perfection that it's gotten lost in the last 20 years. Because we're in the YouTube generation, and all of the other digital medias where what you did is not relevant because I saw it. And so we're constantly trying to meet that benchmark. But by doing so, we are literally having to dumb down our products. You can't learn as many songs that are grade 4 if you're playing 80 of them. You got to dumb it down. So you're playing half notes and whole notes so that they can play the songs that people know. And I don't think that that is going to push us to the level that we need to be at, which is we should be just as good as any other band doing what we do in the manner that we do it.
So, Professor Simmons, you get up on Monday morning, ready to think about the game on Saturday. What happens?
When I start thinking about the idea of the show, or better yet, the concept, I got to think about cultural relevance. So I'm thinking about what's hot in the world today, whether it's politics, whether it's, socially, whether it's musically, those things. He referred to TikTok and stuff earlier. So we have to be engaging on an entertaining level. But when it comes to a marching band fundamental performance, you got to gauge your band. So, for example, let's just go back Labor Day Classic. Let's just go maybe 2 weeks before that.
The Labor Day Classic is an annual game between Prairie View A&M University and Texas Southern University that takes place as a huge rivalry in the city.
Yep. And so I'm going back 2 weeks prior to that, when we really start learning our drills. Coming up with a performance, you have to gauge the level of the students, what they can execute, what they understand, what we would have time for them to do. So a lot of times I get up, I go to lunch, I go to Phil and Derek's every day. I sit outside on the patio with my drill paper, with my yellow legal pad. I write all my notes, what I want to do for the show. To learn a show the week of, the execution will not be there because you don't have enough time for the students to get those reps. When you're watching them on the field, that's by memory. It's not like football to whereas, timeout, you get in the huddle and the coach tell you, okay, you go here, you go here, you go here, now do that. Go. No, it's none of that. Mm-hmm. People think the band just get out there and start shaking and dancing. No, that is with decency and order. That has to be done a certain kind of way.
Okay. I'm going to cut you off right here. Mm-hmm. All right. Let's talk about game day because we only have a limited amount of time. Let's talk about game day. Mm-hmm. There's two performances, really. There's one that happens in the stands and there's one that happens on the field. And when you're in the stands, here's what it looks like to me. You're responding to things that are happening on the field. You're playing university fight songs and alma maters, but you're also responding to the crowd that's there that day. And you're also responding to the opposing team's band. That is a lot. Are you in the stands in that moment, just really attuned to what's happening around you and calling plays that you've already practiced? Or do you sort of come in with a plan saying these are the things we're going to play throughout the game? How does that part work?
There's 6 parts to the whole thing that you're talking about.
Oh, Lord.
Not 2 parts. You have the 0 quarter, which is supposed to, show your technical prowess and how well your band plays in a traditional format. You have the first and second quarter and third and fourth quarter, which are all about the team and supporting them and trying to get them to the W. The third quarter has become traditionally known as the quarter in which all the sections do battles individually. Then you have, of course, halftime that's our time. And then we have the fifth quarter. So there are literally 6 different elements to this game that we prepare for, and we prepare in the extreme. So I will get speakers and I'll have us play a fifth quarter from 2 years ago that we used against somebody else and play against the current band and make them react to it with the tunes that they have to put them in a real life situation. We put them on the field and we record the show and they run the show without playing every other time. So they're given the opportunity to get the reps in a way that allows them to digest it. So we could put a show together in a day, and I've done it, which is amazing because I couldn't do that at the stage that Professor Simmons is at right now. Of course I couldn't in the first year. But as time goes, you get your bearings about you and you get your wits about you, and the students understand exactly what you're asking for. So literally, we prepare for those 6 interludes in the game differently. Each one of them is its own thing.
Are you preparing in the same way, Professor Simmons? Is this something all band directors know, or do individual band directors break the parts up differently?
I think it starts in rehearsal. There has to be continuity in what you do. I know every day we practicing the school songs. Every day we're practicing our marches. Why do we practice it that way as soon as we warm up? Because that's the order of the game a lot of times. When we get to the game, however, as far as game day and all of the excitement and experience, one, I'm never watching the game. I'm never watching the game.
I'm always watching the game. See, that's the difference there.
Sometimes I have, ADHD. I just be all over the place, and not in a very crazy kind of way. I have to speak to people as the band director. We're political figures. We're professors. We're all of these things. So I have a staff that manages during the game. They're watching the game. They're making sure we do this, that, or the other. There's lists. There are fifth quarter songs. There are certain songs that we have to wait to play after the game because of the musicality of them, the duration of them. See, there's a time and a place for everything. And when you go into the game, we already know where everything is going to go. We just don't know how it's going to go.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So when you go onto the field at halftime, I see this as probably the most important part because you are actually the center of literally everybody's attention. There's no one trying to see if a quarterback dropped the ball. There's no one trying to see what cheerleaders are doing. People don't get snacks during this period. Like, this is a moment where all eyes are on you. And in this part, I'm just saying this for our audiences, the thing they have to know is that in that moment, you're playing classical band arrangements and you're doing contemporary music and you're moving around the field in very intricate formations, often at very high speeds. And they put those instruments down at some point to do dance routines. And there are dancing girls. And there are, 5, 6 drum majors who are out here. And in that moment, it is just a whirlwind of movement. And in that moment, how do you know when you step off the field, when do you step off the field feeling good, like we killed that? Or are you watching it like that section messed it up, these people got it right, that sort of thing? How are you watching this happen as you're doing it?
I guess I'll go first. Mm-hmm. As the band director, on the sideline, we're the biggest critic the whole time. I know I am. I'm watching for everything to go perfectly. I'm watching for the spacing. I'm watching for the execution. I'm watching for the tempos. I can't even really enjoy it, but once it gets towards the end and you start kind of adding up in your mind, okay, the drum major came on. Okay, there were no hiccups. Okay, the band is sounding off. Okay, they stepping really hard. Okay, all right. Nobody turned on the wrong yard line. Okay, the spacing is really good. Okay, we made it to concert formation. Great. Okay, good. The girls are rolling. Okay, no slip ups. Okay, let's go to this dance routine. Okay, we're getting house. The crowd is into it. Okay, we've made it safely off the field. Yes. And I can't even speak for Dr. Zachary, but I'm watching this thing from a different perspective than everybody there. Everybody there's just on their toes. They don't know what's coming next. The students they're so busy executing. We are the biggest critics. I think the band directors are the biggest critics.
Would you agree with that, Dr. Zachary?
I don't look at it from that perspective. I'm extremely militant. So those days leading up to that performance are rough for the band. Monday through Thursday, they don't like seeing me. I know they don't see me. Like, oh God, he's here. But on Friday, on rehearsal day, I don't have much to say. Because by the time we get to rehearsal, I shouldn't have to say anything else. And it's like watching Michael Jordan shoot a ball. And the ones that he knew was going to go in, he had turned around already. He knew it was going to go in. And that's kind of the way I look at the band. I know when they're going to hit before they go on the field. It's just that way. I don't even think about it. In fact, I'm probably in my happiest state when they're performing. Now, those 4 or 5 days of actual practice, I am quite the bear. I promise you that. But when they get to that performance, I'm normally in that sense of euphoria if things have gone well in those practices.
So, Dr. Zachary, I read one time, like in the New York Times, I think it was, that Prairie View is really the innovator of the modern drumline. I have read that before. Is that true?
I think that we have the
longest... And what makes drumline so important?
We have the longest standing tradition with that. I think that the Box created that style back in the late 80s. No one else was doing it before. And you can go and look for it. Everyone was playing drums. You had what's going on with the Funk Train. You had all those things happening. And all of us were young bands in the 80s, to be honest with you, because the true tradition started in the 70s and it built up into the 80s. But no one was doing what Prairie View is doing, and as far as innovation with a drum feature. And they borrowed some from the DCI thing, and they borrowed some from the HBCU thing, and they merged them together to come up with this whole box mentality. And, one of the things that when I look at the shows from the past, the drumline feature could be up to 2.5 to 3 minutes long out of a show. I could not do that right now because it would be E.T., drumline, and if I did put the Foxes out there, I'd definitely get fired and come off the field. So just the when I went to school, the time limit for a show was 12 to 14 minutes. That is eclipsed down to 7.5 to up to 9 if you're at home. So the things that the audience is used to seeing, like that innovative drumline feature, we can't do it for as long as they're used to seeing it. And even when you give it to them in that truncated version, it's so different from what they know that their response is, man, that was nothing. They didn't throw him up to the moon. I'm like, oh, man, here we go.
All the people who are in the band are not music majors, right? And so you have people from across the campus who are participating in this process.
I'm a statistical person, so I could tell you how many are music majors.
Well, then go right ahead.
20% of the band is music majors. So out of 330 members, 20%. I want to say the largest percentage is biology, followed by engineering, followed by architecture, and then the psychology, criminal justice, nursing. So music is one of the smallest majors in band.
Is that the same case for you too, Professor Simmons?
Well, I haven't been here long enough to know the percentage, as Dr. Zachary would say, but I would definitely say,
I didn't think you would.
yeah, I would definitely say in every institution I've ever been associated with, band and music transcends all disciplines. So most of the people in the band are engineering majors, things of that
Science
nature,
majors.
marketing, branding, radio, TV. It's all over the place. Like Dr. Zachary just said, most of his band is biology majors. They taken off their lab coats to come play the trumpet. And that goes to show you the power of everything that we were saying about our institutions and our bands.
Timmy Zachary is professor of music and director of the Marching Storm Band at Prairie View A&M University. Brian Simmons is the director of the Ocean of Soul Marching Band at Texas Southern University. They've both been talking to us about HBCU bands and homecoming. Thank you so much for being here with us. This is all just a very good education and something I think many of us know must take a lot of time, but don't think about all the different parts that go into it. So thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. And I want to make sure your audience knows one thing. And I think that as they go down by anybody's band, they should really stop and say thank you to the students who are in all these programs for all the sacrifices that they're making in such a turbulent time that they can't be a regular student in a regular year, but they can especially not be a regular student right now. There are parties that they can't go to if they want to keep the band safe. There are jobs that they have to let go if they want to be in the band. There's so many things that they're giving up in order for you to get that experience at a football game or a parade or something on television. And I think that they deserve at least a thank you.
When we return, we'll talk to two students from the band and get a sense of what their experiences have been like. Welcome back to ICU. I'm Melanie Price. I'm joined in this segment by students who are members of the Prairie View A&M University Marching Storm. We're going to talk to these students because they represent a special population of the band. They are international students and Latino students who did not grow up necessarily with HBCU bands as a part of their tradition. We're going to talk to them today about how they bring their own heritage to this experience and what they get from being a part of the band. First, we're going to talk to Churton Monroe and his brother Joshua Monroe. They are students from the Nassau, Bahamas. Welcome, Churton and Joshua.
Thank you.
I first saw my first college band as a kid growing up in Houston. I grew up near Texas Southern, and that's where I saw my first college band. You grew up in the Bahamas. Wait, first, tell us what instrument you play.
The mellophone.
Mellophone /French horn.
Okay, mellophone /French French horn. He wants you to know that he is a double musician, and his brother just plays one single instrument. I took that from what you said. So tell us a little bit about how you first came to know about Black college bands.
I first knew about Black college bands when I was still in school, which was a long time ago. Doc, he came over into the Bahamas in 2012, and he had a workshop, and I was in the Royal Bahamas Police Force Combined Youth Band back home, and then our director introduced Doc as the new director of bands at Prairie View A&M University, and he had a workshop, all instruments, trumpets, saxophones, and he just was talking about how he's the new band director, and he was recruiting for the Marching Storm. I didn't come to the Marching Storm until 18, but I was a part of his workshop that he had in 2012, and from then, every time I had free time, I would look up PV bands. Then my next choice after PV would have been JSU, and then that's how I became interested and found out about Black college bands.
So, Churton, you're the oldest.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you the first to come and be a part of the band?
Yes,
and did
ma'am.
you set the trend then for your siblings? I should mention that the Monroe family has 3 members of their family who are part of the Marching Storm, which I think is pretty amazing. Tell us more about why you thought you wanted to come and be a part of the band here at Prairie View.
Back home, we have a festival called Junkanoo, and it's where a lot of different instruments come together, and we paste costumes. It's basically on holidays. It happens Boxing Day, New Year's Day, and Independence Day. So it's a festival where lots of musicians just come together and they practice music, play music, and we paste these beautiful costumes, and then we call it rush. We rush from it's probably about from 12 to 6, I'm going to say 12 midnight to 6 a.m. where we just rush, go down the street playing music. And I felt like being in a HBCU that has basically the same principle of it, just the joy of just being able to play the horn to your fullest potential.
So, Joshua, Big Brother comes.
Yeah.
And you see him leave and go be a part of this band. Is that what made you decide to come to the university as well?
Yes, ma'am. I had no experience with any HBCUs before my brother came to Prairie View. So when I saw him came, so I thought to myself that if he could join a HBC band, then I could, because I think I'm a better player than him. So, yeah.
So what's your favorite part of being in the band?
I like dancing, like the fifth quarter, like that's like where we play against the other band. I like that. I like the halftime shows as well. They're pretty fun. Yeah.
So if you wanted to talk to other international students who they didn't necessarily grow up in Black American culture, what would you say as advice for them about being in a band like this?
I'd say that it's a very new experience. It's a fun experience. If you wanna have fun while doing what you love, playing your horn, then I'd recommend joining an HBCU band.
So, Churton, you said you were in a very organized band when you were home when you first met Dr. Zachary. Do you see yourself maybe going back to the Bahamas and trying to implement some of the things you've learned as a part of the Marching Storm in the Bahamas?
I don't know. I'm one of the engineers, so my specialty is engineering right now. But if I do go back and there's someone who would like to start something up like that, I would like to help them in starting it up. But being the main one starting it, I'm an engineer. I'm not gonna really go down that route.
How about you, Joshua? Future Dr. Zachary, or?
I doubt it. I'm a architecture major, so I don't see being a band director in my future.
Here's the question that I think is very interesting. Engineering and architecture seem as 2 very difficult majors. Being in the band is also seen as something that's very time consuming. How do you manage both of them at the same time?
I guess manage your time. Do not go to too much parties. Stay off the phone, the game. Turn the TV off and just focus on your work. And then come to my practice and do what you have to do, and then go home and do homework. So, yeah.
If you're just joining us, this is ICU. I'm Melanie Price. I'm talking to members of the Marching Storm Band at Prairie View A&M University. You were just hearing Churton and Joshua Monroe, who are two parts of a 3-sibling family who are from the Bahamas. We're now going to transition to a discussion with Kayla Gonzalez from San Antonio, Texas, and the Monroe sister of the group, Jerusha. Okay, so we're joined now by Kayla and Jerusha. Tell us first what instruments you play. Kayla?
So I play the mellophone, so it's a high brass instrument in the Marching Storm Band.
Jerusha, what instrument do you play?
I play the alto saxophone.
So far, that's the only instrument you people have mentioned that I don't know what a mellophone is, looks like.
We typically say it's a bigger trumpet. That's really the most we can describe it as. But
Thank you, because when the other one said it, I was like, oh, okay. Mellophone. I thought that was like a xylophone when he said it. Until he said play his horn, I was completely lost. Okay, so I wanted to do a segment where I not just talk to students who are members of the band. I want to talk to students who didn't necessarily grow up in this tradition and then how they came to be members of the band. So Kayla, you are Latino.
yes,
And
ma'am.
you are a member of an HBCU band. Tell us a little bit about how you came to know that these kinds of bands existed and then how you came to be in the Prairie View Band.
So I guess I would start like my high school experience. I was always a part of a band. Since middle school, I was always in band. I took band courses, and at first I didn't like it, but it's just one of those courses that I had to take. And then slowly but surely, I was playing the French horn. And then in high school, I stopped for like 2 years a little bit because I had moved out of the state, and then I came back. And that's when it really started to show a little bit more my interest in band. I remember in high school, since I am from San Antonio, I moved to a different part of San Antonio. I went to the east side, and that's where it started showing a little bit more like traditional kind of marching styles. And then I guess it was very important in high school to I guess they really emphasized of how important and like the real like value and nature in band was. And I thought it was really interesting. And honestly, like the way things were going, I thought that band was really one of my only ways of just staying in school and everything. It was a really good motivation factor in where I'm at today. When it came to my senior year of high school, we had to like immediately start like looking into colleges and where do we want to go. Obviously, band was just an option. It was optional, but for me, I think, like I said, it was a big factor and influence in staying in school that I decided to keep going in college. So Prairie View was one of the interviews that I had to take. And then, of course, FAMU, I tried FAMU as well, which is Florida A&M University. That was also another great influence in our marching style in high school. And those were like one of the biggest ones that we had in our school. That was a great image. And I think it was really interesting for me. And I that's part of the reason why I'm still in college, honestly, is because of the marching storm and band stuff in high school.
So a lot of people listening want to know what it's like to be a Latino in a historically Black college marching band.
It's funny that y'all say that because I know we have a lot of Latino, Hispanic based people in the band, but we don't really necessarily like see it like that. Well, at least for me personally, I don't really necessarily see it like that. I feel like at some point it just feels like we're all a family, and like, we're able to naturally just communicate with everybody else in the band, even if we are from a different, I'm Hispanic, and, my other friend, like, I know I had my best friend from high school. She was Black, and she was so funny. She was really cool. We made jokes all the time, and we just connected like if we were sisters. So I think that was another reason why I feel like really comfortable here in the band. And even though it's a little different sometimes, I do feel like out of place, but for the most part, I think it really does help me band is one of just those things that it's just like, it brings a lot of people together. And I think a lot of people don't see it that way from afar, but inside the band, it's really nice to have, those people around you.
I should mention that this year Prairie View announced that they have their first Hispanic drum major. They announced that
so
during
proud of
Hispanic
Jesus.
Heritage Month.
Yes, ma'am. I was so proud of him. Like, I had told him to. I was like, I knew he was low-key doing something, and I told him, I was like, you're going to be making big moves. And when I see him get that position, I was so proud of him. I was like, you're like one of the first, right? And he was just like, I know, like everything was just going so fast for him. And I thought that was really, really interesting.
That's really cool. So Jerusha,
Yes,
are you the
ma'am.
youngest? You're the youngest of the Monroe
No,
children?
I'm actually the middle. I'm in between.
Okay, so
Trin
you're
and
the middle.
Joshua.
Good to know. So Jerusha, you have a sibling who's in the band, then you come, and then another sibling comes. So you guys are here together. Does that help in terms of being a part of the band and feeling okay with it? Or do you find that you are trying to sort of live up to the reputations that your brothers have also?
I think it helps to a certain extent because I'm coming into a new program and there's someone already there that I'm comfortable with. And he has already made connections with certain people. So I was already introduced to some of his friends before I actually joined the band. So I said for that, it was good. But when he came, he was section head. So I'm like, okay, I have some work to do because he's setting trends. And I'm like, okay, we have to make sure that we're keeping up to what Churton's doing because we're new. And we just have to make sure that all the Monroes are on top of their stuff and we're sticking to it and we're just doing the best that we can do.
What would the two of you say to maybe an international student or a Hispanic student who has seen a band like Prairie View perform? They feel like it's something that they can do and they want to be a part of it. What kind of advice would you give them?
Me, honestly, I'd say do it. Like, don't be afraid. The band is really a family, and that's why I really love the Marching Storm. Like, when I came, I immediately just clicked with everyone in my section. Like, we're just so together, and we do everything as a family. So I'd say join it. Like, you will enjoy the experiences. You will have great connections. You will fall in love with everyone there because you will just feel so welcomed and so homey. It's a really good experience. I say just go ahead and pursue it and do your best.
What would you say, Kayla?
I guess for me, it would be like everybody has a place here. Honestly, like if you feel like you're doubting yourself, I guess that's where I would come in and be like, well, don't, like she said. I mean, it's a place where people feel comfortable as soon as they step in. Like it's a new place, it's a new environment. You're gonna have to feel uncomfortable at times, but I think that's the part of the learning experience here and the growth that we see with each other. And so when we grow together, we become the Marching Storm. And I think that's really cool.
This is ICU. I'm Melanie Price, and I've been talking to students who are members of the Marching Storm Band at Prairie View A&M University. ICU is a production of Houston Public Media. Our show team includes technical director Todd Hulslander, producers and editors Matthew Beerer, Mark DeClaudio, and Laura Burks. Our sound designer is Dave McDermott. You can also hear all our episodes online and subscribe to the podcast at icushow.org. I'm Melanie Price, filling in for Eddie Robinson. Thank you so much for listening.